He didn't even look up from his phone when he said it. Sign the papers, Elena. I'm done. 7 years. 7 years of standing beside Damian Moretti through blood, through silence, through every ugly thing this life demanded. And he dismissed her like a tab he forgot to close. Across the marble table sat Vanessa Kane, draped in red, watching with the patient smile of a woman who had already won. Elena's hands didn't shake. That was the part nobody expected. She picked up the pen and she signed. What Damian didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the woman he just discarded held a secret older than his empire. A secret someone else was already digging up. If this were your life, your marriage, your name, your dignity handed back in a single envelope, what would you do? If this story already has your heart pounding, you're in the right place. Subscribe to this channel and follow every episode to the very end, because what's coming will shake you. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city or country. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The morning it ended, Elena woke up before the alarm. She had been doing that for months, her body clock quietly refusing to sleep past 5, as though some part of her already knew the house was no longer safe to rest in. She lay in the dark and listened to the sounds of the Moretti townhouse settling around her, the low hum of the heating system, the distant sound of a car moving through the street below, the particular silence of a room where two people hadn't touched each other in 6 weeks. She got up, made coffee, stood at the kitchen window and watched the city turn gray before the sun arrived. Damian came downstairs at 7 dressed for a meeting, his tie already knotted. He moved through the kitchen the way he had been moving through their marriage for the last 8 months, efficiently, without looking at her, like she was furniture he'd stopped seeing. "There's coffee," she said. "I have a car waiting." He picked up his phone from the counter without breaking stride. Elena watched him cross to the door and stopped him with 3 words, spoken quietly, not accusingly. "You smell like her." He paused. She watched his shoulders tighten, then deliberately relax, that micro-controlled reaction she had learned to read better than any language. He turned around and looked at her for the first time in what felt like weeks, and what she saw in his face wasn't guilt. It was something closer to relief, like she had finally handed him the opening he'd been waiting for. "Elena," he set his phone down on the side table. "Sit down." "I'm fine standing." "I need to say something." "Then say it." He looked at her, really looked, and she thought for one terrible second that something human might surface. That the man she had married, the one who had once stayed awake all night beside her when she was sick with a fever, might push through the controlled exterior and say something true. But the moment passed. His jaw set. "I've had the papers drawn up," he said. "Divorce papers. My lawyer filed them yesterday." The kitchen seemed to hold its breath. Elena didn't move. She felt the words travel through her like cold water. Not shocking exactly, because she had sensed the shape of this moment for months, had practiced for it in quiet, private ways that no one would ever see. But hearing it out loud was different from preparing for it. Hearing it made it a fact. "You filed already," she said. Flat. Not a question. "I didn't want a scene." "No, you just wanted it done before I could say anything." He had the grace not to answer that. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out an envelope, set it on the counter between them with the practiced evenness of a man accustomed to conducting difficult business. "The settlement is more than fair. The apartment on West 68th, your personal accounts, monthly support for 5 years. My lawyer said." "I don't care what your lawyer said." The silence that followed was different, sharper. She watched something flicker behind his eyes. Not regret, she decided. Discomfort. There was a difference. "Elena, is it Vanessa?" He said nothing. "I'm not asking you to confess," she said. "I'm asking you to at least be honest with me for 30 seconds. Is it Vanessa Kane?" A muscle moved in his jaw. "It's more complicated than... It's a yes or no question, Damian." Another silence. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. "Yes." Elena nodded. "Just want to once." She picked up her coffee cup and took a long sip, more to give her hand something to do than because she wanted it. She set the cup down. She looked at her husband, the man who had stood beside her at an altar 7 years ago and said words about forever, and she felt something strange move through her chest. Not grief exactly, something more like the sensation of a door she hadn't known was open finally swinging shut. "How long?" she asked. It doesn't... How long, Damien? He looked at the window. About a year? A year. She absorbed that. A year of careful lies, of reasonable explanations for late nights and missed dinners, and the gradual disappearing of whatever warmth he had once pointed in her direction. A year of her not asking the right questions because some part of her had understood that the answers would end everything. "I'll need a few days to review the papers," she said. He blinked. He had clearly expected something else. Tears, accusations, the kind of scene he claimed he'd been trying to avoid. Her composure seemed to disturb him more than anger would have. "Of course," he said slowly. "Take the time you need. I'll have my own lawyer look at them." Yes, that's reasonable. I'll be out of this house within the month." He opened his mouth, closed it, picked up his phone, moved toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame and turned back. And for a moment she saw it again, that brief crack in the surface, some vestige of the person he used to be. "I'm sorry," he said. I didn't plan for it to go like this." Elena looked at him steadily. "No," she said. "You just let it." He left. She heard the car pull away from the curb below. She stood in the kitchen for a long time with her cold coffee and the envelope on the counter, and she did not cry. Not because she was too strong, but because the grief was too large for tears just yet. It was the kind of loss that had to be metabolized slowly. Like a poison, the body processes one cell at a time. She opened the envelope. Read every page. Her lawyer, a woman named Sandra Park, who had helped 3 of Elena's friends navigate their own exits from complicated marriages, told her 3 days later that the settlement was substantial, reasonable, and crafted very carefully to ensure Elena would have no legal basis to contest anything related to Damien's business holdings. "He's protecting the organization," Sandra said, not unkindly. "I know," Elena said. "Do you want to fight it?" Elena thought about that for a long moment. She thought about what fighting would look like. The lawyers, the depositions, the public exposure of a marriage that had quietly hollowed itself out over the course of 7 years. She thought about sitting across a conference table from Damien and Vanessa's carefully constructed legal team, being asked to justify her worth. "No," she said. She signed the papers. She moved into the apartment on West 68th. She packed what she had come to the marriage with, which was not very much, and left behind everything that had accumulated in the years since, because she did not want to carry the weight of it. What she kept was the necklace. It was a small thing, a gold chain with an unusual pendant, a lozenge-shaped piece of dark amber set in an ornate bezel, filigreed with tiny leaves in a style she had always associated vaguely with Eastern Europe, though she couldn't have said why. She'd had it her entire life, or as far back as her memory stretched. Her adoptive mother, a quiet woman named Ruth Hart, who had raised Elena alone in a Connecticut suburb, had given it to her when she turned 18 with a note that read, "This came with you. I always meant to ask where it was from. Now I suppose I never will." Ruth had passed 6 months before Elena married Damien, and the necklace had been the thing Elena wore to the funeral, and then to the wedding, and every day since. She did not know where it came from. She had never thought to find out. That was about to change. 3 weeks after Elena moved into the West 68th apartment, Damien held what his people called a family dinner, a phrase that had always made Elena quietly uncomfortable, given that the family in question was a criminal organization with interests in 6 states and enough political relationships to embarrass a Senate hearing. It was held at the Moretti estate in Westchester, the kind of house that announced itself with a private gate and a long driveway lined with old oak trees, and it was attended by the men who ran Damien's various operations, their wives, their grown children, and in the case of 2 captains, their mistresses dressed as girlfriends. Elena was not invited. She hadn't expected to be. What she hadn't expected was the phone call she received the same evening from her former sister-in-law, a woman named Lucia, who had always been the one Moretti family member to treat Elena with something approaching genuine warmth. "They announced the engagement," Lucia said without preamble. "Tonight, in front of everyone." Elena sat down on the arm of the couch. "Already?" Vanessa had it planned. The ring, the champagne, the whole production. She had it catered differently than the usual dinners. Damien obviously knew, but from the look on some of the captains' faces, they didn't. A pause. "Elena, I'm sorry. I know this isn't..." I'm fine, Lucia. You don't have to be fine. I'm not performing it, Elena said. I don't know what I am. I'm not fine exactly, but I'm not broken either. Does that make sense? It makes sense, Lucia said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. What are you going to do? Find a job. Get my credentials updated. I had a career before I... She stopped. Before I let it get swallowed by that world. She didn't say. I'm going to start over. Lucia was quiet for a moment. Then, my mother called me this afternoon, before the dinner. She was upset about something. She wouldn't tell me what, but she was, Lucia, your mother is not a woman who rattles easily, and she was rattled. Elena frowned. Vivian Moretti, Damien's mother, was the kind of woman who had survived 40 years in the orbit of organized crime by mastering the art of surface-level calm. She had always been respectful to Elena. Not warm, exactly, but respectful, in a way that went beyond the polite distance she maintained from most people. Did she say anything specific? Elena asked. She said, another pause. She said she needed to speak with you, directly, that it was important and it couldn't wait. She can call me. She wants to meet in person. A beat. Elena, she was crying. They met 2 days later at a small Italian restaurant in the East 40s that Vivian had chosen, a place that didn't cater to their world, which Elena understood as a deliberate choice. Vivian arrived first, which was unusual. She was a handsome woman in her late 60s, impeccably dressed in a way that never quite tipped into ostentation. With iron gray hair she wore pulled back and dark eyes that had always seemed to be evaluating some internal ledger. When Elena walked in, Vivian stood up. That was also unusual. Thank you for coming, she said. Of course. Elena sat across from her. The waiter appeared. Vivian waved him away. Elena studied her face and saw immediately what Lucia had meant. There were circles under Vivian's eyes, a slight looseness in her jaw that spoke of a woman who had not been sleeping. I'll come directly to it, Vivian said. I need you to tell me about the necklace. Elena went still. My necklace? The amber pendant, gold chain, filigreed setting. You wore it at Christmas last year. I saw it and I... Vivian stopped, pressed her fingers flat against the table as though steadying herself. I didn't say anything because I told myself I was wrong, that it was a coincidence. There are lots of necklaces. There are, Elena said carefully. Mine was custom made. Vivian's voice had dropped. By a craftsman in Palermo in 1974. A wedding gift from my husband's family, given to me when I had our daughter. She opened her bag and laid a photograph on the table between them. A Polaroid, old and slightly faded, showing a young Vivian holding an infant, and around Vivian's neck, clearly visible, was a necklace. Elena looked at the photograph. Then she reached up and unclasped her own necklace and set it on the table beside the Polaroid. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. Vivian made a sound that was not quite a word. She picked up the necklace with hands that trembled, turned it over, looked at a specific point on the back of the bezel. And then she put it down very carefully and covered her mouth with both hands and looked at Elena with an expression so raw it was almost unbearable to witness. I have been looking for her, Vivian said, voice barely audible, for 26 years. Elena's heart was doing something strange inside her chest. The hair along her arms had risen. She kept her voice very steady because the alternative was to let something enormous happen in the middle of a restaurant, and she was not ready for that yet. What happened to her, she asked. She was taken, Vivian said, from the house. She was 11 months old. There had been trouble between my husband and another family. Men came to the house when security was reduced. My husband he didn't survive the night, and our daughter, her voice fractured. She was gone. They found no trace. We were told she was dead. Eventually I had to accept. She stopped, swallowed. But I always thought. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope, set it on the table. I hired an investigator after Christmas, she said, after I saw the necklace. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I told myself even if the necklace was the same, it proved nothing. But I gave him your background information, your birth records, everything I could access, and he found... She pushed the envelope across the table. Elena did not open it. She sat very still and looked at the photograph of the young woman holding the baby, and then looked at Vivian's face. The architecture of it, the particular set of the jaw, the way her eyes were shaped, and felt something that had no name move through her entire body. "What does it say?" Elena asked. Vivian closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were wet. "It says," she said carefully, "that you need to have a blood test." Elena picked up the envelope. Her hands did not shake either. Some people, when their world is about to fundamentally change, go very quiet inside. It isn't numbness. It's something more like the moment before a storm arrives, when the air pressure drops and the birds stop moving and everything becomes so still, it almost hums. Elena Hart, divorced, adrift, starting over, sat in a restaurant in Midtown Manhattan and looked at a photograph of a baby she didn't recognize and felt that stillness move through her like a tide. She had no parents. She had no past. She had a necklace and a note from a woman who was already gone and questions she had never let herself ask too loudly because asking them had always felt like an accusation against the woman who had loved her with limited means and unlimited steadiness. Now those questions had come looking for her. She put the envelope in her purse. She looked at Vivian Moretti, the mother of the man who had just discarded her, and said the only thing that seemed honest. "Whatever the test says," Elena told her, "I want to know the truth." Vivian reached across the table and put her hand over Elena's. It was the first time anyone in that family had touched her with anything approaching tenderness in a very long time. Outside, the city moved at its usual indifferent pace, cabs and commuters and pigeons and noise. And somewhere in Westchester, in the estate she had spent 7 years quietly making a home, Damian Moretti was planning a future with a woman who had engineered his marriage's destruction, and he had absolutely no idea what was already in motion. The blood test took 8 days. Elena had expected to feel something during those 8 days. Anxiety, maybe, or the specific dread of waiting for a result that could rewrite everything. Instead, she felt oddly functional. She went to bed at reasonable hours. She ate. She answered emails from Sandra Park about the final divorce paperwork. She called a former colleague about a position at a small financial consulting firm that had reached out 6 months ago, back when she had still been pretending everything was fine. She made coffee every morning and stood at the window of the West 68th apartment and watched the street below with the patience of someone who had learned, across many years in a difficult life, that certain things could not be rushed. What she did not do was tell anyone. Not Lucia, who called twice and left messages. Elena returned with brief, reassuring texts. Not Sandra, who was perceptive enough to sense something had shifted but professional enough not to push. And certainly not Damian, whose name appeared on her phone once. A single call on a Tuesday afternoon that she stared at for 4 full rings before letting it go to voicemail. He did not leave a message. She did not call Vivian either, though the older woman had pressed a card into her hand at the restaurant, a handwritten number, not the formal Moretti estate line. They had agreed, wait for the result. Then talk. Elena was good at waiting. She had spent 7 years becoming good at it. The investigator Vivian had hired was a man named Croft, and he called Elena directly on a Thursday morning, not Vivian, because that was what Vivian had apparently instructed. His voice was flat and precise, the kind of voice that had delivered difficult news many times and had learned to strip it of inflection. "The mitochondrial DNA comparison is conclusive," he said. "Maternal lineage is a match. The lab ran it twice." Elena was standing in her kitchen. She set her coffee cup down very carefully on the counter. "Conclusive," she repeated. "Yes." "What does that mean in plain terms?" "It means Vivian Moretti is your biological mother," Croft said. "The probability is greater than 99.97%. There's no statistical interpretation under which the result is ambiguous." The kitchen was very quiet. Elena could hear the refrigerator's hum, the faint sound of traffic below the window, her own breath moving in and out at a rate that felt slightly too fast. "Thank you," she said. She hung up. She stood at the counter for a long time. Then she picked up her coffee, finished it, rinsed the cup, and sat down at the small table near the window with a notepad and a pen. She wrote nothing on the notepad. She just held the pen and looked at the street and let the fact of it move through her in layers, the way certain truths have to be absorbed. Not all at once, but in waves, each one reaching a little deeper than the last. She was the daughter Vivian Moretti had lost, which meant she was the sister Damian Moretti never knew he had. She put the pen down. She picked up her phone and dialed Vivian's number. Vivian answered on the first ring. They met that same afternoon at Vivian's private apartment in the city, a place Elena had never been, separate from the Westchester estate. A floor in a pre-war building on the Upper East Side that smelled of old paper and cut flowers, and the particular kind of order that comes from a person who has controlled their environment for decades, as a substitute for controlling everything they couldn't. Vivian opened the door herself. She took one look at Elena's face and knew. She stepped back from the door without a word and walked into the sitting room, and Elena followed her in and closed the door behind her, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. They simply stood in that room with its high ceilings and its careful furniture and the afternoon light coming in through tall windows, two women on opposite sides of an impossible fact, and let it be real. Then Vivian sat down heavily in the chair nearest the window, and she pressed both palms over her eyes, and her shoulders moved in a way that had nothing composed about it. Elena sat on the couch across from her. She leaned forward with her elbows on her knees. "Tell me," Elena said quietly. "Everything. From the beginning." Vivian lowered her hands. Her eyes were red, but her voice, when it came, was steadier than Elena expected. "Your father, my husband, Marco, was in a dispute with a family from Philadelphia, the Caruso operation. It had been building for 2 years. Territorial mostly, but Marco had done something that insulted their leadership, and men like that don't forget insults." She paused. "You were 11 months old. We had reduced the household security that weekend because Marco believed a truce negotiation was in progress. He trusted the wrong person." Her jaw tightened. "They came on a Saturday night. Marco was killed in his study. 2 of our people were killed at the door, and by the time anyone reached the nursery..." She stopped. "I was gone," Elena said. "You were gone." Vivian looked at her. "We searched for 2 years. I cannot tell you what I spent, financially, personally. I hired people. I called in every favor Marco's name still carried. The Carusos denied taking you. Eventually, there was a resolution to the conflict, and part of the resolution included their sworn statement that they had not taken the child, that it was not their operation." Her voice was very dry. "I didn't believe them. But I had no proof, and I had Damien to raise. And eventually the investigators told me it was most likely that you had not survived." "But you didn't stop," Elena said. It was not a question. She had seen the way Croft operated, systematic, expensive, long-term. That kind of search didn't start last Christmas. Vivian's mouth thinned. "I never commissioned a continuous investigation, but every few years when something surfaced, a lead, a name, a record that didn't quite fit, I would open it again, quietly. I never told Damien. I was young when it happened, and She paused. "I decided he should grow up knowing he had lost a sister, not that I was still searching. I didn't want him building his life around a hope I couldn't guarantee. So he doesn't know. He knows I had a daughter who was taken. He doesn't know I've been actively searching, and he certainly doesn't know about you." Her eyes moved over Elena's face with an expression that was almost painful in its directness. "When I saw that necklace at Christmas, I nearly said something that night, but I stopped myself. I told myself I was a foolish old woman seeing what she wanted to see." A beat. "I wasn't foolish." Elena thought about Christmas. She thought about that dinner, Damien quiet and preoccupied across the table, the captains and their wives filling the room with performed warmth, Vanessa not yet visible, but already present in every small absence in her marriage. She had worn the necklace. She always wore the necklace. "Why didn't you tell Damien before you told me?" Elena asked. Vivian looked at her steadily. "Because I needed to know if it was true first. And because I wasn't certain how he would react. Damien is not a man who handles surprises involving his family with..." She chose her word carefully. "Grace." Elena almost laughed. It came out as a short, humorless sound. "No, he's not." Silence stretched between them. Outside, a siren passed several blocks away, then faded. "We have to tell him," Elena said. "Yes." "He's not going to..." She stopped, pressed her fingers against her mouth for a second. "He just divorced me, Vivian. He is engaged to another woman, and we are about to tell him that the wife he threw away is his sister." "Half-sister," Vivian said, with the precision of a woman who had apparently been thinking about this for 8 days straight. Different father, which means legally and biologically. I know what it means legally. Elena stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the street below. How is he going to hear this? Not well, Vivian said quietly. That's what I thought. Elena turned back. And Vanessa? Something shifted in Vivian's expression, a tightening around the eyes, a slight compression of the lips that Elena recognized as the expression Vivian made when she was controlling a strong feeling. What about her? Vivian said. She's going to be in the room when we tell him, or he's going to tell her immediately after. Either way, she's going to know. Yes. Is that a problem? Vivian was quiet for a moment longer than the question required. I don't trust that woman, she finally said. I have said so to Damien twice. He doesn't want to hear it. What specifically don't you trust? Specifically? Vivian's eyes met hers. The timing. She appeared in his life at the precise moment when the organization was under the most internal pressure, when he was most vulnerable to a woman who offered simplicity. And she moved very quickly to put distance between Damien and the people who had known him longest. A pause. Including you. Elena absorbed that. You think she worked toward the divorce? I think, Vivian said carefully, that nothing about Vanessa Kane is accidental. The meeting with Damien did not happen immediately. Vivian insisted on preparing, on having Croft compile a full documentation package, on having the DNA results certified through a second independent laboratory, on constructing the conversation in a way that could not be easily dismissed or deflected. Elena agreed with the logic, even as the delay wore on her, because waiting had a different texture now. It felt less like patience and more like standing at the edge of something with no way back. She started the job at the consulting firm. Small office, moderate salary, work that required actual concentration. It was the first time in 7 years she had sat at a desk that was entirely hers, in a building where no one knew her as Damien Moretti's wife, and the anonymity of it was both lonely and quietly, stubbornly restoring. She was 3 days into the job when Lucia called again. Something is wrong inside the organization, Lucia said. She was not whispering, but her voice had the particular low steadiness of a person who was choosing their words in real time. 2 of the captains had a confrontation at a dinner last week. Carmine Russo and your Uncle Felix, Damien's Uncle Felix, nearly came to blows in front of everyone. Elena frowned. Felix Moretti was 63 years old and had been with the organization since before Damien was born. He was not a man who lost control publicly. What was it about? The restructuring Damien's been pushing. He's been redirecting revenue streams, shifting control of certain operations away from the older captains and toward people Vanessa apparently recommended. Felix says it's dismantling 20 years of structure. Carmine agrees with him. Damien told them both to fall in line. And they didn't. Felix walked out of the dinner, Lucia's voice dropped even further. Elena, that man has never walked out on Damien. Not once. Not in 30 years. Elena leaned back in her desk chair and looked at the ceiling. How many captains are unhappy? At least 3 that I know of. Probably more who aren't saying it yet. A pause. She's doing something to him, Elena. I don't know how else to say it. He's making decisions he wouldn't have made 6 months ago. Cutting people who've been loyal forever. Trusting people nobody knows. Lucia. Elena kept her voice careful. I need you to tell me something honestly. In the time since the divorce, since Vanessa's been fully in the picture, has anything happened financially? Any accounts moved? Any assets restructured? Anything that looked administrative but felt off? A long silence. Why are you asking that? Lucia said finally. Because I'm starting to understand something, and I need to know how far it's gone. Another silence, longer. There was something, Lucia said slowly. 3 months ago. Felix mentioned it to me in passing, and he seemed to think it was unusual, but he wasn't sure enough to raise it formally. Some transfers out of the estate operating accounts. Reclassified under a holding company Damien apparently created. Felix had never heard of the holding company before. Who controls the holding company? Damien, on paper. But? Felix's accountant looked into it quietly. The signatory structure. Lucia stopped. Lucia. It includes Vanessa Kane, Lucia said. The office was very quiet around Elena. She could hear the ventilation system, the distant sound of a colleague's phone ringing 3 desks away. How much moved through it? Elena asked. Enough that Felix was scared to put the number in writing. Elena stood up from her desk. She walked to the narrow window of her small office and looked out at the brick wall of the building across the alley and thought very precisely and quickly about what she was holding. Because what she was holding was no longer just a secret about identity. It was the shape of something deliberate, something constructed. A woman who had positioned herself next to the most powerful man in the room, then systematically loosened every bolt that held the structure together. "Don't tell Felix anything yet," Elena said. "Don't tell anyone." "Elena, what is going on?" "I'll explain when I can. Right now I need you to trust me." A beat. "And I need you to get me any documentation Felix's accountant has. Quietly. No paper trail back to you." Lucia's breath on the line was audible, the specific breath of someone recalculating risk in real time. "You're going to bring this to Damien." "I'm going to bring several things to Damien," Elena said. "At the same time." She called Vivian that evening. "We can't wait any longer," Elena said. "It's not just about the DNA. There's something happening inside the organization. Vanessa has access to financial structures she shouldn't have. If we give her more time—" "I know," Vivian said. She didn't sound surprised. She sounded like a woman who had already arrived at the same conclusion and had been waiting for Elena to catch up. "I've been hearing things from my own sources. I wanted to be certain before I said anything to you." "How certain are you?" "Certain enough." A pause. "I'll arrange the meeting with Damien this week." "Does he know what it's about?" "I told him I needed to speak with him about a family matter, urgent." Her voice was dry. "He assumes it's about Felix and the captains. He's been expecting pushback from me about the organizational changes." "Good," Elena said. "Let him assume that, right up until we sit down." A silence. Then Vivian said more quietly, "Are you ready for this?" Elena thought about the question honestly. She thought about what she was walking into, a room with the man who had divorced her, who had chosen another woman over 7 years of marriage, who was about to discover that the woman he had discarded was the sister he had spent his entire life not knowing he'd lost. She thought about what that room was going to feel like, the specific kind of emotional violence of it, the way every personal grievance and every professional threat and every question about identity was going to collide in the same space at the same moment. "No," she said honestly, "but I'm going anyway." The meeting was set for a Wednesday evening at the Westchester estate, Damien's territory, Vivian's home ground. Elena drove herself, which she understood Damien would find unusual. In 7 years of marriage, she had rarely driven herself anywhere. There had always been a car, a driver, the apparatus of his world surrounding her. She parked on the street outside the gate and sat in the car for 3 minutes. Not hesitating, just settling. The housekeeper let her in through the side entrance at Vivian's instruction. She was led to the library, a room Elena knew well, all dark wood and serious books, and the faint smell of the cigars Damien occasionally smoked near the window. Vivian was already seated. Croft's documentation sat in a plain manila folder on the side table. Damien arrived 4 minutes late, which was unusual. He stopped in the doorway when he saw Elena. The look on his face was not anger, not guilt. It was a kind of controlled blankness that she recognized as his default defensive expression. The face he put on when something was happening that he hadn't anticipated and hadn't yet decided how to manage. "Elena." His voice was flat. "I wasn't told you'd be here." "I asked her to come," Vivian said. "Sit down, Damien." "What is this?" "Sit down." He looked at his mother, then at Elena, then at the folder on the side table. He came into the room slowly, like a man reading an environment for threat, and sat in the chair across from them both. "If this is about Felix," he started. "It isn't about Felix," Vivian said. She reached over and picked up the folder, set it on the table between them. "It's about something I should have told you a long time ago, and something that's happened recently that changes everything you think you understand about your family." She paused. "And about Elena." Damien's eyes moved between them. "What are you talking about?" Vivian opened the folder. She set the first document in front of him, the DNA report, certified, with the laboratory letterhead and the conclusion in clear printed type. He looked at it without touching it. "That," Vivian said quietly, "is a comparative DNA analysis, mitochondrial, Run twice by two separate laboratories. She paused. Elena is my biological daughter, Damien. She is the child who was taken from this family 26 years ago. The library went absolutely silent. Damien did not move. He sat with his hands flat on his thighs and looked at the document in front of him, and Elena watched his face with the careful attention she had learned across 7 years of reading a man who rarely showed what he felt directly. And what she saw was not a simple thing. It moved through him in stages, too fast to follow cleanly. Confusion first, then the beginning of dismissal, then something that stopped the dismissal cold as his eyes moved down the page and found the probability figure, 99.97%, and stayed there. He picked up the document. He read it. He set it down. He looked at Elena. And for the first time in longer than she could accurately remember, Damien Moretti looked at her without any of the architecture of their marriage between them, without the habits of dominance and distance and the quiet mutual withdrawal of two people who had been failing each other slowly. And what was in his face was something raw and young and entirely unmanaged. "This isn't," he started. "It's real," Elena said. Her voice was even. "I've seen the original results. I had my own lawyer verify the methodology. It's real, Damien." He stood up, crossed to the window, stood there with his back to them, one hand pressed against the frame. "The necklace," he said. He was not speaking to either of them exactly. "I remember that necklace." His voice had changed, stripped of its usual precision, something underneath it that sounded almost like a child. "My mother has a photograph. There's a photograph in the hallway upstairs." "Yes," Vivian said softly. "You're wearing it in the photograph." He turned around. He looked at Elena. "You've been wearing it your whole life." "My whole life," she confirmed. Another silence, longer this time. Then Damien crossed back to his chair and sat down heavily, and he put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, and for a long moment he simply stayed like that. The most powerful man in a six-state criminal organization sitting hunched over in his mother's library, undone by a document and a necklace in the face of a woman he had decided was no longer his concern. Elena let him have the moment. She had learned that too. When to push and when to let a person process. When he finally lifted his head, his face had done something she did not expect. The rawness had not entirely retreated. His eyes were red at the edges. "I divorced you," he said. The words came out with the specific flatness of a man stating something he can barely stand to hear himself say. "You did," Elena said. "I sent you. I threw you out of this family." "Damien," she kept her voice steady. "That's not the most urgent thing right now." He looked at her. "What do you mean?" Elena glanced at Vivian, who gave the smallest nod. Elena reached into her bag and set a second folder on the table beside the first. "The most urgent thing," she said, "is what Vanessa Kane has been doing to your organization while you were busy not looking." Damien's eyes dropped to the second folder. His jaw tightened. "What is that?" "Account transfers," Elena said. "A holding company created 3 months ago with signatory access you didn't authorize. Revenue redirected through it from at least 4 operational accounts." She paused. "Felix's people found it. They were afraid to bring it to you directly because she's already isolated you from the people who would have—" "Felix has been working against me for months," Damien said, and his voice had shifted. Not to anger, but to something harder and more guarded. The reflexive defensiveness of a man whose trust has been systematically managed. "He's been undermining every restructuring initiative. Felix has been trying to protect you," Vivian said sharply, "and you have been too close to that woman to see it. Don't open the folder, Damien," Elena said. He looked at her. Something warred in his face. The impulse to shut this down, to reclaim the high ground, to be the man who controlled what happened in every room he sat in. And then something else, something quieter. He picked up the folder and opened it. Elena watched him read. She watched the moment, precise and unmistakable, when he found the holding company documentation, when he saw the signatory line, when he saw Vanessa's name where no name should have been. His hands went very still on the paper. "This is—" He stopped. "Real," Elena said again. Same answer as before. He set the folder down with the careful deliberateness of a man controlling a physical response. He stood up again. Walked to the window again. This time he stayed there longer. When he turned back, his face was different. The rawness was still there, but it had been joined by something colder and more recognizable. The specific expression of a man who has understood, in one brutal moment, the full architecture of how he has been used. "She was in the accounts," he said. "Yes. She had access I never gave her." The documentation shows it was added during the period when you were restructuring the legal framework for 3 of the northern operations. It would have looked administrative. Routine. Elena paused. She picked the right moment. "You were distracted." "By her," he said. The words had no volume. "By her." The room was very quiet. Vivian sat motionless. Outside, the October dark had come down fully over the grounds, and the library felt sealed against everything beyond its walls. Damien looked at Elena for a long moment. Not the way he had looked at her across the kitchen table on the morning he handed her the divorce papers. Something different. Something that had the quality of a man seeing a person, actually seeing them, for possibly the first time. "You found this," he said. Lucia helped. Felix's accountant. Croft's work on the identity question opened other doors. Elena kept her voice flat and factual. "The two things are connected, Damien. The divorce, the restructuring, the financial access. They're not separate events. They're a plan." He crossed back to the table. He stood over both folders, the DNA report, the financial documentation, and he looked down at them with the expression of a man reading the score of a game he had not known he was playing. Then he looked up at Elena Hart, his half-sister, the woman he had thrown away, and said the only thing left to say, "What do we do?" And before Elena could answer, Vivian's phone buzzed sharply on the table beside her. She glanced at the screen. Her face changed. "It's Croft," Vivian said. Her voice had gone very quiet. "He says Vanessa's financial team moved this afternoon. Another transfer, larger than the others." She looked up. "He says if we're going to stop it, we have 48 hours. 48 hours. Damien said it out loud, once, quietly, the way a person repeats a number they're trying to make real. Then he picked up his phone and stepped out of the library, and Elena heard him in the hallway speaking in a low, controlled voice to someone she didn't recognize. Not his usual driver, not the head of security. Someone new. Which meant Vanessa had already been at work on his inner circle longer than any of them had calculated. Vivian watched the doorway where he had disappeared. Her hands were folded in her lap with the stillness of a woman who had spent decades learning to wait in rooms while men made decisions she had already made 20 minutes earlier. "He's calling someone he still trusts," Elena said. "He has fewer of those than he realizes," Vivian said. Elena stood up and walked to the side table where Croft's folder lay open and read the transfer details again, not because she had missed anything the first time, but because the act of reading gave her hands something to do while her mind worked. The holding company was registered in Delaware under a name that meant nothing, Callaway Strategic Partners, with a registered agent address that would dissolve into a mail forwarding service the moment anyone subpoenaed it. The signatory structure showed Damien as primary and Vanessa as secondary, which on the surface looked like a man bringing his fiancée into the business. In practice, it meant she could move money the moment Damien's attention was pointed anywhere else. And for the past 8 months, his attention had been pointed directly where she needed it, at the restructuring, at the captain disagreements, at the divorce, at Elena. She closed the folder. Damien came back into the library. He looked different than he had 30 minutes ago. Not steadier exactly, but reorganized. The rawness had been pushed back down to somewhere he could manage it. What remained on the surface was the version of him she recognized from the years of watching him handle business. Eyes a degree cooler than normal, jaw set, moving with the precise economy of a man who has decided what room he is in. "I need to reach Felix tonight," he said. "Felix will take your call," Vivian said. "I burned that bridge pretty thoroughly." "Felix has been waiting for you to wake up. He'll take your call." Damien looked at Elena. "Croft, he's your investigator now? Or my mother's?" "Your mother's originally," Elena said. "He briefed me as a courtesy at Vivian's request. Whatever he finds goes to both of us. I want him working exclusively on the financial trail starting tonight. Whatever he needs. He'll need access to the estate accounts. The real ones, not the Callaway structure. He'll have it." Damien picked up his jacket from the chair back and held it without putting it on. He looked at the 2 folders on the table. Then he looked at Elena with the expression she was beginning to understand was the closest he came to open uncertainty. The engagement announcement, the dinner last week. She stood up in front of every captain's family, and he stopped. She was accelerating the timeline, Elena said. Public commitment locks down the narrative before anyone inside the organization can question her position. She needed the announcement before the financial transfers completed, Vivian said. Once she's publicly established as your future wife, challenging her access to your accounts becomes an internal family matter instead of a security breach. Damien was quiet for a moment. That's exactly right. He said it not like a compliment and not like a concession, but like a man checking a box, confirming a calculation he hadn't wanted to confirm. She's been very precise. Yes, Elena said. He put his jacket on, moved toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame. The same posture he'd had in the kitchen the morning he handed her the divorce papers, and Elena felt the echo of that moment move through her chest briefly before she set it aside. I know this is not... I understand that nothing I say tonight is going to... He stopped again, started differently. I need you to work with me on this. Not for me. With me. There's a difference, and I know I don't have the right to ask for it, but I'm asking. Elena looked at him steadily. Let's get through the next 48 hours first. He nodded once and left. They heard his car leave the drive. Vivian let out a long breath. He listened, she said, with the tone of a woman noting something she had not taken for granted. He listened because the money made it real, Elena said. The DNA was personal. The accounts are existential. For a man like Damien, existential lands first. Vivian looked at her with something that was not quite a smile but was close to one. You understand him very well. I spent 7 years learning him, Elena said. I just didn't know what I was going to use it for. Croft worked through the night. By 6 in the morning, he had traced 4 additional transfers through the Callaway structure. Smaller amounts, older, predating even the earliest transfers Felix's accountant had flagged. The pattern went back 14 months, which meant Vanessa had established the financial architecture before the divorce was finalized. Before, Elena calculated quietly, the divorce had even been formally proposed. She called Croft from her car outside the Westchester estate, where she had stayed the night in the guest room at Vivian's quiet insistence. How did she get the secondary signatory position established without his knowledge? Elena asked. She didn't, Croft said. He signed the formation documents in the package for the Northern Operations restructuring. It was on page 11 of a 14-page legal instrument. His attorney would have reviewed the full document, but he didn't read page 11 himself. Correct. The language was buried in a section dealing with authorized representatives for administrative purposes. Standard enough framing that it wouldn't have flagged unless someone was specifically looking for it. Who drafted the instrument? A pause. A firm called Rice and Caldwell, Midtown. They've handled 3 other documents for Moretti operations in the past 2 years. Are they clean? Their senior partner has a personal banking relationship with a subsidiary of a company that Vanessa Kane's family trust invested in 6 years ago. Another pause. It's not proof of collusion. It's a connection that exists. It's enough to know the room isn't clean, Elena said. Who else has seen the formation documents? On Damien's side, his in-house counsel, 1 paralegal, and his CFO. Croft's voice was flat and precise. I'd want to know more about the CFO before I said anything to him. Keep that quiet. What about the transfer that moved yesterday? The large one? $42 million through a correspondent account in the Caymans. It's moving in stages. I can track the first 2 hops, but the third will disperse into multiple instruments. I have maybe 36 hours before it's untraceable. 36 hours. The 48 had already become 36 while she slept. Can you freeze it? Not directly. Damien's attorney could file for an emergency injunction if he has the right judge and the documentation is airtight. That's a 4 to 6 hour process at best. A pause. Ms. Hart, there's something else. His tone had shifted. Not much. Croft was not a man who telegraphed things with his voice, but enough. Say it, Elena said. The engagement dinner last week. I pulled the guest list at Vivian's request as part of the background work on Kane's social network. One of the attendees, a man named Paul Dressen, listed as a financial consultant, he appears in 3 other locations in my research. He's a known intermediary for asset concealment operations. He moves money for people who need money moved without names attached. Elena said nothing. He sat next to Vanessa during the main course, Croft said. They spoke for approximately 40 minutes. I have it on camera. Exterior security footage from the estate perimeter. She was moving the $42 million at the engagement dinner. She was finalizing the arrangements for it. Yes. Elena sat in the car and looked at the pale October morning coming up over the estate's tree line. The specific ugliness of it settled over her. Not the money, not the theft, but the image of Vanessa Kane sitting at that table, wearing Damien's ring on her finger, surrounded by the men who had trusted his name for 30 years, and completing a transaction to hollow out everything they had built. Send everything to me and to Damien's attorney, Elena said. Everything you have on Dresden. And Croft, find out how long she's been planning this. I mean from the beginning, not when she met Damien, before that. Find out who she was before she became the woman who walked into his life. She met Damien at his attorney's office at 9 that morning. Sandra Park was there at Elena's request, which made the room tense in a way nobody addressed directly. The divorce attorney and the mafia lawyer in the same conference room, seated at the same table, with their clients who were no longer adversaries and were not yet anything else. The attorney, a silver-haired man named Hartley, who had the slightly gray affect of someone who had handled extremely bad news for decades without letting it land on him personally, reviewed Croft's documentation for 45 minutes in complete silence, while Elena and Damien sat on opposite sides of the table and did not speak. Felix Moretti arrived at 9:40. He came in without being announced, closed the door behind him, and looked at Damien across the table with the expression of an old man who has been right about something for a long time and finds no satisfaction in it. Felix, Damien said. Don't, Felix said. He sat down. He looked at the documents spread across the table. He looked at Elena. You found this. With help, she said. He looked back at Damien. I told you twice. I know. I told you something was wrong. I told you she was moving things she had no business touching. I know, Felix. And you told me I was being territorial. You said, I know what I said. Damien's voice was quiet and even and had nothing defensive in it, which was the most unsettling version of him Elena had seen since the night before. I was wrong. I'm telling you now that I was wrong. Can we move forward? Felix looked at him for a long time. Then he leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms and said, 42 million. In the Caymans. Moving, Hartley said. Still traceable for approximately, he checked his watch, 33 hours. Can we get it back? We can freeze the first instrument if I file within the next 4 hours. Recovery beyond that depends on how sophisticated the dispersion structure is. Hartley looked at both of them. I need a decision now. File, Damien said. There will be scrutiny. If I file, this transaction becomes a matter of record in a jurisdiction that talks to U.S. regulators. I said file. Hartley picked up his phone and left the room. Felix watched the door close. Carmine knows, he said, about the captains. 3 more came to me yesterday after they heard the announcement. They don't trust her. They were waiting for you to see it. How long has Carmine been aware of the financial piece? A month. He didn't have documentation. He had instinct and one second-hand account from someone inside the CFO's office. Felix glanced at Elena. We didn't know who to bring it to. Your attorney was in that formation document. We didn't know how far it went. The room processed that. Elena watched Damien absorb it, the understanding that the isolation had been more complete than he'd measured, that by the time he might have naturally noticed something was wrong, the structural conditions for noticing had already been compromised. The CFO, Elena said, needs to be suspended from access today, Felix said, before she knows we're moving. She'll know when Hartley files, Damien said. How fast will she know? Depends on whether she has someone watching the filing system. Felix uncrossed his arms and put his hands flat on the table. Damien, when she finds out, and she will find out probably within hours, what does she do? Silence. She runs, Elena said. Or she doubles down. Vanessa Kane does not run, Felix said, and there was something in his voice that made Elena look at him more carefully. I've been doing my own research for the past 3 weeks, quietly. I have a man who knows how to find things. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded envelope, which he set on the table. Her name before she became Vanessa Kane was Mara Voss. She grew up in Philadelphia. The word Philadelphia arrived in the room like a physical thing. Elena felt it before she understood it. Some instinct, the same one that had woken her early every morning for months, moved through her, and she watched Damien's face, and she saw the same instinct hit him half a second later and saw what it did to his expression. "Philadelphia," he said. His voice was completely flat. "The Caruso family," Felix said quietly. "She's connected. Third-generation peripheral connection. Her grandfather worked for them. She's not a soldier, she's not operational. But she grew up in that world and she knows people in it." The silence that followed was not like the other silences in the room. This one had a specific quality. The quality of something enormous and terrible clicking into place, each piece finding its position with the horrible precision of a mechanism that had been built a very long time ago. Damien stood up from the table so abruptly that his chair rolled back and struck the wall behind him. He walked to the window. He stood there with both hands on the frame, and Elena watched his shoulders move with the effort of his breathing. "The Carusos," he said. Not to anyone, to himself. "The family that took—" He stopped. "Yes," Felix said. "She came into my life knowing who she was, knowing what her family had done, knowing about—" He couldn't finish it. "She knew about the kidnapping," Elena said. Her own voice surprised her, steady, low, almost clinical, because if she let it be anything else right now, she would not be useful to anyone in this room. "She may have known about me before I knew about myself." Damien turned from the window. He looked at her, and what was in his face was something she had no clean category for. The anguish of a man who has been maneuvered into destroying the one thing that was actually his, while the instrument of that destruction stood next to him wearing his ring. "She used me to get to you," he said, "to remove you from the equation before Vivian found the necklace," Elena said. "Before anyone made the connection. If I'm out of the family and publicly discarded, whatever Vivian discovers about my identity becomes a private grief, a family secret with no structural consequence. But if I'm still in the house, if I'm still legally connected to the Moretti name, then the discovery that I'm Vivian's biological daughter changes the inheritance structure, the organizational succession, everything." She paused. "She needed me gone." Felix looked at her with the expression of a man reassessing everything he thought he knew about a situation. "You've worked this out." "I've had 8 days to think about it," Elena said. Damien crossed back to the table. He sat down. He looked at the 2 folders, the DNA documentation and the financial trail. And then he looked at Felix and said in a voice with no volume at all, "She knew about Elena before I did." "Possibly," Felix said, "or she was positioned to prevent the connection from ever surfacing, whichever way it emerged." "The organizational restructuring," Elena said, "cutting the old captains, installing new people, people she approved. If Damien dies or is removed, the organization passes to whoever holds the structural authority she's been building into the new framework," Felix said grimly, "which, through the holding company, through the new captains, through 3 legal instruments she helped draft, runs directly back to her." The room was very quiet. Hartley came back in. He looked at their faces and stopped moving for a moment, reading the room. "The filing is in," he said carefully. "The freeze should execute within 90 minutes. He paused. "There's something else. My clerk flagged it just now. Vanessa Kane's attorney filed a motion this morning, 40 minutes ago. An emergency motion related to the Moretti estate holdings, citing her status as the legally recognized fiancé and her position in the Callaway structure." He set a single page on the table. "She's moving to have herself recognized as a co-principal of the primary estate trust." Elena looked at the filing timestamp, 40 minutes ago, while they had been sitting in this room. "She already knows," Damien said. "She knew before we started moving," Felix said. "She was filing preemptively." His voice had gone very flat. "Which means she has a source in this building. In Hartley's office or in the court system, or—" Damien's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face changed. "It's her," he said. Nobody moved. He picked it up, put it on speaker and set it on the table between them. "Vanessa." His voice was so controlled it was almost admirable. "Damien." Her voice on the speaker was warm and unhurried, with a specific quality that Elena recognized instantly as the voice of a person who believes they are still winning. I just got off the phone with my attorney. I'm told there's been some kind of financial filing. I wanted to hear from you directly what's happening. Why don't you tell me, Damien said, what you know about Callaway Strategic Partners? A pause. Very brief. Professionally brief. It's the holding company we set up for the Northern Operations restructuring. You know that, darling. You signed the formation documents. I'm aware of what I signed. I'm asking about what you signed. The secondary authorization? That was standard administrative procedure. My attorney recommended. Stop. His voice had not risen. It was simply no longer performing warmth. We both know what this is. I'm giving you the opportunity to tell me the truth. That opportunity has a very short window. Another pause. Longer this time. When her voice came back, something had shifted in it. Not panic, not guilt. Something colder and more considered. The sound of a person selecting their next strategy in real time. You've been talking to Elena, she said. Nobody at the table moved. Or Vivian, Vanessa continued. Or Felix. Or some combination of people who have wanted me out of your life since the beginning. People who can't stand that you chose someone who actually… Mara, Damien said. Dead silence on the line. I'm sorry? Vanessa said. That's what I said. His voice was as flat and certain as concrete. Mara Voss, Philadelphia, the Caruso family. He waited one beat. Do you want to keep talking about how this is about people not accepting you? Or do you want to have an honest conversation for the first time since we met? The silence on the line lasted 5 full seconds. Elena counted them. When Vanessa, Mara, spoke again, the warmth was entirely gone. What replaced it was not anger. It was something much more controlled and much more dangerous. Be very careful, Damien, she said quietly. Is that a threat? It's advice. From someone who knows more about your family's past than you've ever been told. A pause. And about what happened 26 years ago. And about what certain people are willing to do to make sure it stays buried. Damien's hand moved toward the phone. Elena put her own hand out and stopped him. Not touching him, just a gesture, a flat palm in his direction. He looked at her. She shook her head once. She leaned toward the phone. Vanessa, she said. A short silence. Elena. The name came out with a specific texture. Not surprised, not rattled, but recalibrated. Like a chess player acknowledging that a piece has moved into an unexpected position. The 42 million is frozen, Elena said. The Callaway structure is being audited. Your motion this morning will be contested within the hour with documentation that will make your fiancé designation legally untenable. She kept her voice level and factual. Whatever leverage you think you have, whatever you believe you know about what happened 26 years ago, I want you to hear me clearly. The only thing that happens next is that we find out how much of it you're willing to explain to a court. The line was quiet for a moment. You have no idea, Vanessa said slowly, who you're dealing with, either of you. A beat. I'm not the one you should be afraid of. I'm the one who's been managing the people you should be afraid of. Her voice dropped slightly. The Carusos let me run this operation because they trusted me to keep it clean. If I stop managing it, if this goes sideways, the people behind me do not use lawyers. The line went dead. The conference room held its silence for a moment after the call ended. Hartley was standing very still near the door. Felix had both hands flat on the table and was looking at the center of it with an expression that had something ancient and tired in it. Elena sat back in her chair. Her heart was moving faster than she wanted it to be, and she was conscious of keeping her breathing even, keeping her face neutral, because of the thing that Vanessa had just said, the casual, specific menace of it, the implication that she was not the ceiling of this threat, but merely the surface, had reached somewhere cold inside her. The Carusos. The family that had taken her from a nursery 26 years ago. The family that had denied it for decades while Vivian searched and grieved and closed and reopened the investigation and eventually learned to live in the wreckage of a loss that had never been explained. They had not gone away. They had sent someone. Damien looked at Elena across the table, and for once his face was not controlled at all. What was in it was fear. Not the ordinary operational fear of a man handling a business threat, but the specific human fear of a man who has understood in one concentrated moment exactly how much he has already lost and how much more there is left to lose. She said the people behind her, he said. I heard her, Elena said. If the Carusos are actively running this, then we're not just dealing with a woman who defrauded your accounts, Felix said, and his voice was the steadiest in the room, the voice of someone who had been in dangerous rooms for 40 years and had learned to think most clearly in the ones that were most dangerous. We're dealing with an operation that has been positioned inside your organization for over a year, with financial access, with influence over your new captains, with a legal claim in progress on your estate. He looked at Damien, and with the knowledge that Elena is your sister. Elena felt the full weight of that last sentence settle over the room. If the Carusos had sent Vanessa, if Vanessa knew about the necklace, about Vivian's investigation, about the DNA results, or if she was positioned to find out, then she knew that the woman she had worked so carefully to remove from the Moretti family had just been confirmed as the blood heir Vivian had been searching for decades. And she had just been told, on a recorded call, that they knew. Felix looked at Elena. Something moved in his face. Not quite apology, not quite warning. Something between them. She knows where Vivian lives, he said quietly. Elena was already reaching for her phone when the second call came in. It was Lucia's number. She answered it immediately and heard, before she could say a word, the sound of Lucia's voice stripped of everything except the bare fact of what she was reporting. Elena, Lucia said. Vivian didn't answer her door this morning. Her housekeeper called me 20 minutes ago. The apartment. There are signs of a struggle. She's not there. The conference room went absolutely still. Elena stood up from the table, and in that moment something happened in her chest. Something that had been building since the morning Damien handed her the divorce papers, since the restaurant with Vivian and the photograph, since 8 days of waiting for a test result that rewrote everything she thought she knew about herself. Something that had been bending under the accumulated weight of all of it finally stopped bending and went straight. And what replaced it was something harder and colder and more purposeful than grief. She was the daughter of a woman who had searched for her for 26 years. She was the woman who had been maneuvered out of this family by people who understood exactly what her presence meant. She had signed divorce papers without fighting because she had believed the only thing at stake was her own dignity. She had been wrong about that. Damien was already on his feet. Felix was on his phone. Hartley had gone pale near the doorway. Elena looked at the 2 folders on the table, the DNA report that had started all of this, the financial documents that had confirmed what she'd suspected, and she made a decision in the space of approximately 4 seconds that she understood, with complete clarity, was the kind of decision you do not walk back from. She picked up her phone. She called Croft. I need everything you have on the Caruso organization's current structure, she said when he answered. Active members, operating locations. Anyone you can confirm has been in contact with Vanessa Kane in the last 18 months. A pause. And I need it in the next 2 hours because we are no longer investigating a financial crime, Croft called back in 41 minutes. Elena was in the back of Damien's car, moving through midtown traffic with Felix in the front seat and Damien beside her, his phone pressed to his ear, running parallel calls to the 3 captains. Felix had confirmed we're still clean. The city outside the windows looked ordinary in the specific way cities look ordinary when the person inside the car is operating in a completely different reality. Cabs and pedestrians, and a food truck on the corner of 48th. All of it continuing without any awareness that somewhere in this city, a 68-year-old woman was being held by people who had been patient enough to wait 26 years for their next move. Caruso's active operation in New York runs out of 2 locations, Croft said. He spoke fast, which was unusual for him. Elena had learned in the past weeks that Croft's pace was a reliable indicator of his assessment of urgency. A legitimate import business in Red Hook and a property in Riverdale, residential, owned through a shell, 4-bedroom house on a private lot with a detached structure behind the main building. The Riverdale property has been used for sensitive meetings based on 3 separate surveillance reports I've accessed from other investigators who worked adjacent cases. Which one has Vivian? Elena said. I can't confirm either, but the Riverdale property has lower visibility, better containment, and it's where I'd put someone if I needed them quiet for 12 to 24 hours. A pause. I'm sending the address now. Elena looked at her phone as the address came through. She showed it to Damien without a word. He looked at it, said one word to the person on his other call, Riverdale, and that was all. Felix turned from the front seat. He looked at Elena with the careful eyes of a man who had spent 40 years calculating risk and was calculating it now in real time. How do you want to do this? Fast, Elena said, before she can be moved, before Vanessa has time to change the arrangements now that she knows we're moving on the financial side. She looked at Damien. How many people can you have there in under an hour that you trust completely? 6, he said without hesitating. Felix? I can add 4, Felix said. 10 is enough if we go in clean. No escalation beyond what's necessary. We need Vivian out, and we need Vanessa's contact at that property alive and talking. She paused. Vanessa herself. Where is she right now? Damien's jaw tightened. Her attorney's office. She went there after the call. My man outside her building confirmed. She'll have been told about the freeze on the transfer by now. She's damage controlling the legal side while whoever she has in Riverdale manages the other side. Elena looked out the window. She thinks she has time. She thinks the legal motion buys her leverage, that we won't move aggressively while there's an open court filing that could be used to paint us as the aggressors. A beat. She's wrong about that. Felix made a sound that was not quite a laugh. You've been in this world longer than you thought, he said. It was not an insult. 7 years of listening, Elena said. I paid attention. They reached Riverdale in 53 minutes. Damien's 6 men were already positioned around the property perimeter when the car stopped 2 blocks from the address. 3 on the street side, 2 along the rear property line, 1 on the detached structure. Felix's 4 were covering the exits. Nobody moved until Damien got out of the car and stood on the sidewalk in the November cold and looked at the house for approximately 30 seconds. Elena got out beside him. You don't have to go in, he said. Not protectively. Practically. Assessing. Yes, I do, she said. He looked at her. Whatever he was going to say about it, he didn't. He signaled his lead man, a broad-shouldered, unhurried person named Thomas, whom Elena had seen twice at estate events and had always found slightly frightening, and they moved. The house was a wide 2-story on a large corner lot, set back from the street by a substantial hedge that had been allowed to grow intentionally tall. The kind of property that announced privacy without announcing wealth, which was its own kind of statement. The front windows were dark. A single light showed at the rear of the ground floor. Thomas took the front door. It took him 11 seconds. They were inside before Elena had fully processed the sequence, moving through a dark front hallway that smelled of cigarettes and cleaning product, following the floor plan Croft had sourced from county records and sent through while they were in the car. The ground floor was empty. 2 men cleared it in under 2 minutes. Some bedrooms off the main hallway, a kitchen at the rear with a half-eaten meal on the table, a back door left unlocked which was either carelessness or a signal, and Elena noted it and moved past it. The light was coming from the basement. Thomas looked at Damien. Damien looked at Elena. She nodded. The basement stairs were narrow and uncarpeted, and each step announced their weight clearly, which meant whoever was at the bottom already knew they were coming. Thomas went first, Damien second, Elena third, with one of Felix's men behind her. The basement was one large room, unfinished, with exposed pipes running along the ceiling and a single work light hung from a hook in the center that threw harsh shadows in every direction. There was a metal folding chair near the far wall. In the chair, hands zip-tied to the armrests, was Vivian Moretti. She was conscious. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut, and there was dried blood along her jaw from a cut above her cheekbone. And she was sitting with the particular rigid stillness of a person who has been managing pain for several hours by not moving. But her right eye was open and focused, and when it found Elena's face across the room, it did something that cost Vivian something to allow. It went soft, briefly, 1 unguarded second, before reassembling into the controlled expression Elena had come to associate with the woman's baseline. There were 2 men in the basement. One was near the stairs. He had been behind the door, and Tomas put him against the wall before Elena had registered his position. The second was standing near Vivian's chair. He was younger than Elena had expected, maybe 30, with the flat affect of someone doing a job rather than invested in its outcome. He looked at the number of people who had just come down the stairs, and he made the specific calculation Elena had been counting on. The calculation of a man who is employed, not dedicated. And he put his hands up. Damien crossed the room to Vivian in 4 strides. He crouched in front of the chair and put his hands on his mother's face with a gentleness Elena had never seen from him. a complete dropping of every managed surface, and said something too low for anyone else to hear. Vivian's jaw moved. She said something back. He nodded. Tomas cut the zip ties. Elena was already across the room, kneeling beside Damien. She put her hand over Vivian's and felt the older woman's fingers close around hers with a grip that had surprising force in it. The grip of someone who has been frightened and has held it together and is now allowing, just slightly, the strain to show in the hands because the hands are less visible than the face. "I'm all right," Vivian said. Her voice was raspy. It wasn't." She stopped, looked at Elena. "You found me." "Croft found you," Elena said. "You told Croft to look." "Yes." Vivian's right eye held hers for a moment. "Good girl," she said softly. Felix's man was already on the phone with a doctor. Private, no hospital, no records, the arithmetic of this world that Elena had learned to move inside without touching directly. Tomas had both men from the basement secured and separated. Damien stood up. He turned to face the younger of the two men, the one who had been standing by the chair, and he looked at him with an expression that had nothing theatrical about it. No performed menace, just a man who needed information and had very little patience left for anything that delayed it. "Who sent you here?" Damien said. The man's jaw moved. I'm not a courtroom," Damien said. "I'm not building a case. I need a name and a location, and then the nature of your evening changes significantly depending on what you give me." A pause. The man's eyes moved to the stairs, to Tomas, back to Damien. He was calculating the same thing he had calculated when they first came down. Who in this room was invested in his outcome and who wasn't? "Reyes," he said. "Marco Reyes. Reyes, he runs the Red Hook side." "Reyes took the order from who?" "I don't know who's above Reyes. I don't ask." "Did a woman named Vanessa Kane contact Reyes in the last 12 hours? A fractional hesitation. "Yeah." "What did she tell him to do with the woman in the chair?" He looked at his hands. "Hold her. 24 hours. Then—" He stopped. "Then what?" Damien said. His voice was very quiet. The man did not answer. He didn't have to. Elena saw Damien's shoulders move with one controlled breath, and she saw Felix, across the room, turn his face away for a moment. The basement was very quiet. "Where's Reyes right now?" Damien said. "Red Hook, the warehouse on Van Brunt." Damien looked at Thomas. Thomas nodded once and spoke 2 words into his phone. "What?" They had Vivian in his car and moving within 8 minutes. Elena rode with her, one hand still holding hers, while Felix rode ahead to coordinate what was happening in Red Hook. Damien was in a third car, and Elena could see it moving parallel to them 2 lanes over, keeping pace. Vivian spoke carefully, as though measuring what each word cost her. "She called me yesterday afternoon, Vanessa. She said she needed to speak with me privately, that it was about you, about the DNA results. She said Damien knew and was—" She stopped, pressed her free hand against her ribs. "She said Damien was upset, that he needed his mother." Her voice carried a dry, precise self-reproach. "I knew it didn't sound right. I went anyway." "You went because she used my name," Elena said. "Yes." Vivian looked at her. That was the specific lever. She knew which one would work. A pause. "She knows a great deal about this family." "She's been studying it for a long time," Elena said. The car moved through the dark. Vivian's doctor was meeting them at a private address in the West Village, somewhere clean and contained. Elena looked out the window at the city going past and thought about Vanessa. Mara Voss, raised on the edges of the Caruso world, patient enough to construct a persona and a relationship and a legal position over more than a year, calibrated enough to identify exactly which emotional pressure points would produce the results she needed. The divorce had not been incidental. It had been structural. Remove Elena before Vivian's search produced a result. Isolate Damien from the people who knew him well enough to question her. Build the financial access before the relationship was permanent, so that by the time anyone looked, the paperwork would show it as routine. It was a serious piece of work. Elena could acknowledge that without it being anything other than what it was. "She's not going to run," Elena said, mostly to herself. Vivian heard her. "No, she'll lean into the legal motion. She'll try to make this about Damien's instability, about family conflict, about—" She'll reframe everything as a man being manipulated by a scorned ex-wife. Her voice was tired but precise. She needs the court filing to hold long enough for the financial dispersion to complete. If the 42 million reaches the final instruments, it's frozen, Elena said. Hartley filed this morning. Then she needs to break that freeze before it becomes permanent. Vivian's hand tightened briefly on Elena's. She's going to come after the documentation. Whatever Croft has, whatever Felix's accountant found, she'll attack the sourcing. She'll claim it was obtained illegally, that it was fabricated, that she'll need a judge to believe that faster than Hartley can counter it, Elena said. How long does Hartley have? 48 hours on the freeze before it has to be ratified by a higher filing. Elena paused. We need to get everything to Hartley tonight. Croft's full documentation, Felix's accountant, the recording of the call, all of it. And we need to do it before she files a motion to suppress on the grounds that the recording was... Her phone rang. Croft. She's moving, he said without preamble. Vanessa Kane left her attorney's office 11 minutes ago. She's heading toward the Moretti estate in Westchester. My man on her says she had a conversation outside the building. 30 seconds, someone handed her something. He couldn't get close enough to identify the person. She's going to the estate, Elena said. Yes. What's at the estate that she needs? A pause. The original formation documents for the Northern Operations restructuring. Hartley has copies, but if the originals show any alteration, any evidence that the Callaway language was inserted post-signing, the originals become the key evidence. If she gets to them first, she destroys them, Elena said. Or alters them to remove the alteration, Croft said, which is actually more dangerous because then the copies Hartley has look like fabrications. Elena looked at the back of the driver's head. How far is she from the estate? She's got maybe a 20-minute lead. Get Damien on the phone, Elena said to the driver. Then to Croft. What else is at the estate that she'd want? The family's safe, Croft said. Based on what Felix's accountant told me about the original Moretti estate trust, there are physical bearer instruments in the family safe that predate the modern legal structure. If those transfer to someone with standing as a recognized family member of the principal. He paused. The fiancé motion she filed this morning is specifically designed to establish that standing. She's not going to take the documents, Elena said slowly. She's going to execute the motion. She's going to show up at the estate and take physical possession of the trust instruments while the court filing gives her legal cover. A beat. She filed the motion not to win in court. She filed it to buy 30 minutes of legal ambiguity while she cleaned out the safe. The car went quiet. Damien's voice came from the driver's speakerphone. He had been listening on conference. How long would it take her to get into the safe? She's been in that house for 8 months, Felix's voice joined the call. She knows where it is. She probably has the combination, or someone who does. 15 minutes once she's inside, Damien said. Maybe less. A pause. I'm turning around. Damien, Elena said. She's not taking my family's trust instruments while she has a fake court filing and a 2-car head start, Elena. I know, I'm coming with you. A short silence. You don't... She knows who I am now, Elena said. She knows about the DNA results. If she gets those trust instruments, the first thing she does is file a competing inheritance claim in my name, using the fact that I'm Vivian's biological daughter as the lever to challenge the entire estate structure. She'll use my identity against both of us. A beat. This is as much mine as it is yours. I'm coming. The Westchester estate sat at the end of its long oak-lined drive, and when Damien's car came through the gate with Elena beside him, the house was lit from within. Every downstairs window showing light, which meant Vanessa had been here for at least 10 minutes and had not been trying to be subtle about it. Damien was out of the car before it fully stopped. Elena was 3 steps behind him. The front door was unlocked. They went through it and into the main hall, and the sound reached them before the sight did. Something heavy being moved across a floor, the specific drag of furniture being shifted, coming from the direction of the study. Damien moved fast. Elena kept pace. The study door was open. The painting behind the desk, a large dark oil landscape that had hung there for 30 years, had been pulled from the wall and was leaning against the side of the desk. The safe behind it was open. Vanessa was standing in front of it with a leather document case in her left hand and a thick manila envelope in her right, and she turned when they came in with the expression of someone who had been expecting this and had already decided how to play it. She looked composed. That was the word for it. Not calm, but composed, arranged, everything on the surface controlled, even as Elena watched her eyes move quickly across the room and measure distances and options with the rapid precision of a woman who had been trained in some fundamental way to do exactly this. "You made good time," Vanessa said. "Put it down," Damien said. "I'm afraid I can't do that." She held up the manila envelope slightly. "This is the original trust instrument. My attorney filed a motion this morning recognizing my standing as a principal under the Callaway structure. I'm legally entitled to—" "Your motion is fraudulent," Elena said, "based on a holding company created through a forged authorization and a secondary signature you obtained through misrepresentation. Hartley is filing the counter-documentation as we stand here." Vanessa looked at her. Something moved behind her eyes. Not fear, something more clinical. Reassessment. "You've been busy," she said. "So have you," Elena said. "Mara." The name landed. Vanessa's composure didn't crack. Elena had not expected it to, but something behind it shifted, like a weight redistributing. "You don't know what you're standing in the middle of," Vanessa said. Her voice was even and quiet. "Either of you, this isn't about money. It was never about the money." She looked at Damien. "The Carusos have wanted the Moretti estate in receivership for 20 years. The money was the mechanism. What they actually want is the territory, the political relationships your father built, the port access, the things that don't show up in a trust document." She paused. "I was sent here to dismantle this from the inside. That was the assignment. I've been executing it." She looked at Elena. "You were the complication I didn't plan for." "I know," Elena said. "You were supposed to disappear quietly, sign the papers, take the apartment, start over." A beat. "When Vivian started investigating the necklace, when I found out through my sources that she had commissioned Croft, I had maybe 6 weeks to complete the financial extraction and establish my legal position before it became too complicated." Her voice was matter of fact. Reporting. "I didn't expect you to move this fast. You kidnapped my mother," Elena said. "I needed time. You put your hands on a 68-year-old woman and you held her in a basement and you told the people holding her to—" Elena stopped. Not from grief. From the decision to not let anger make her imprecise. "Put the documents down, Vanessa. And if I don't, then what happens next is messier than it needs to be. For you." Elena took one step forward. "The 42 million is frozen. The Callaway structure is documented and the documentation is already with Hartley. Croft has your connection to Reyes, your connection to the Caruso operation, and a recording of your phone call this morning in which you made an implicit threat to my brother's life." She watched Vanessa's face carefully. "The Carusos sent you here to win quietly. You have not won quietly. The moment this becomes a court proceeding, the moment Reyes and your 2 men from the basement start cooperating with anyone who offers them a reduced consequence, your organization's position in this city becomes a liability they will want to cut. You become the loose end." Vanessa was very still. "You're more exposed than they are," Elena said. "You're the one with your name on the documents. You're the one who made the phone call. You're the face of this." A beat. "They will let you take the consequences while they relocate and start over." Something finally moved in Vanessa's face. Small, controlled, but real. "You're trying to turn me," she said. "I'm telling you the truth about your situation," Elena said. "What you do with it is your decision." Vanessa looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Damien, and whatever she saw in his face told her the same thing Elena had just said from a different angle, and Elena watched her process it. Watched a very intelligent, very capable, very cornered woman run the calculation one final time. Then Vanessa looked back at Elena and said quietly and without any warmth at all, "You're not what I expected." "Nobody ever is," Elena said. Vanessa set the document case on the desk. She set the manila envelope beside it. She straightened her jacket with the precise adjustment of a woman maintaining form even at the edge of complete collapse. And she looked at Damien one last time with an expression that Elena decided she didn't have a clean category for and didn't need one. "Your attorney is going to want a cooperation agreement," Vanessa said. "Talk to Hartley," Damien said. His voice was empty of everything. Vanessa crossed the room toward the door, Tomas was in the hallway. She stopped in the doorframe and looked back at Elena. Just one look, level and unreadable. And then she was gone. Damien sat down in the chair behind the desk. He put his elbows on the surface and pressed his hands over his face and held them there. Elena crossed to the desk. She picked up the manila envelope and checked the contents. The original trust instrument, intact, unaltered, and set it back down carefully. She picked up the document case and set it beside the envelope. Then she looked at her brother, the word still new and strange and heavy with everything it contained, sitting with his face in his hands in the study where his father had been killed 26 years ago, in the house where an 11-month-old had been taken from a nursery, and where a family had spent more than 2 decades living in the wreckage of that night, and she did not say anything immediately because some moments are not improved by words. When he finally lowered his hands, his eyes were dry, but the skin around them had a bruised quality. "Is she going to give us the Carusos?" he said. "If Hartley structures the agreement correctly," Elena said, "she's rational. She'll trade what she has to trade to reduce what she's facing. And Reyes? Reyes will follow her lead once he understands she's cooperating. The captains, Felix, Carmine, the others, they're going to want accountability," Elena said, "and clarity about who runs this organization and how." She paused. "That's a conversation for when Vivian is settled and the legal filings are in order and everyone has slept." She looked at him steadily. "Not tonight." Damien looked at the desk in front of him, at the trust instrument in its manila envelope, at the open safe behind the shifted painting. "She had the combination," he said. His voice was very quiet. "She had it written on a piece of paper in her purse. I saw it when she opened the case." He stopped. "I gave it to her 3 months ago because she said, I thought she was—" He didn't finish. "Damien," Elena said. He looked up. "We got the documents back," she said. "Vivian is safe. The money is frozen and the evidence is in Hartley's hands." She held his gaze. "The rest of it, what you should have seen, what you should have done differently, that's a real accounting that you're going to have to make, but not in the next 10 minutes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at her with something she recognized from earlier in the evening, that stripped, unmanaged expression, the young version of him underneath everything the years had built. "You didn't have to come back for any of this," he said. "I threw you out of this family. You had every reason to let it—" "She took our mother," Elena said simply. "That's the only reason that matters right now." His jaw worked. He nodded once. He stood up. From the hallway came the sound of Tomas's voice, low and steady, relaying something to someone on the phone. The house around them held the particular silence of a place where something enormous has just finished happening and the air hasn't settled back yet. Damien looked at Elena. "What happens now?" She picked up her phone and called Hartley. While it rang, she looked at her brother across the desk where their father had died and their family's history had been hidden for 26 years, and she said, "Now we finish it." Hartley answered. Elena started talking. And somewhere across the city, in a car moving away from a house in Westchester with Tomas in the seat beside her, Vanessa Kane, Mara Voss, looked out the window at the New York night and made the only calculation left available to her, and began, very carefully, to decide exactly how much she was willing to give up to survive what was coming. Hartley filed the counter documentation at 11:40 that night. Elena sat in the study while he walked her through each instrument over the phone, the certified DNA results, Croft's full financial trace, the recording of Vanessa's call that morning, the testimony statements from the 2 men taken from the Riverdale basement, and the account access logs showing every unauthorized movement through the Callaway structure dated and time-stamped against Vanessa's known whereabouts. It took 2 hours. When it was done, Hartley said, with the careful understatement of a man who had practiced law for 31 years and had learned not to promise outcomes, "This is as strong a package as I've seen. The freeze will hold." "What about the fiancé motion?" Elena said. "Withdrawn. Her attorney filed the withdrawal 40 minutes ago." Elena absorbed that. Vanessa's attorney filing a withdrawal meant Vanessa had already been on the phone with him, had already begun managing her legal exposure, already pivoting from offense to survival. It was, Elena thought, the most honest thing the woman had done since she arrived in their lives. "The cooperation agreement," Elena said. "Her attorney reached out to me at 10:15. We have a preliminary conversation scheduled for tomorrow morning." A pause. "Ms. Hart," The cooperation she's offering is substantial. Names, dates, operational structures going back 8 years inside the Caruso network. If half of it is accurate, this isn't just a case against her. This is a serious federal matter. I know. The U.S. Attorney's Office is going to want to talk to everyone in this family. I know that too, Elena said. Make sure whatever agreement she signs includes full accountability for what happened to Vivian. That's not negotiable. Understood. She hung up. The study was quiet around her. Damien had gone upstairs an hour ago to call Felix, to call the 3 captains, to begin the long and unglamorous work of explaining to the men who ran his organization that the woman they had distrusted from the beginning had in fact been an instrument of the family that had been the Morettis' oldest enemy, and that the decisions he had made under her influence needed to be examined one by one and where possible undone. Elena did not envy him that conversation. She also understood it was necessary in a way that went beyond strategy, that Damien standing in front of those men and saying what he had gotten wrong, without deflection, was the only way to rebuild what Vanessa had spent 14 months carefully dismantling. She turned off the study light and went upstairs. Vivian was in her room at the estate. The doctor had been and gone by midnight. 2 cracked ribs, the cut above her cheekbone closed with 3 neat sutures, a mild concussion that required monitoring for the next 24 hours. He had left instructions with the housekeeper and a phone number and told Vivian with the directness she apparently inspired in medical professionals, "You're in better condition than most people would be after what you've described. Don't test it." Elena knocked on the bedroom door at midnight. Vivian's voice came through clearly. "Come in." She was sitting up in bed, propped against pillows, with the particular alert stillness of a person who is tired enough to sleep, but too conscious of being watched over to allow it. The swelling around her eye had deepened in color, but the eye itself was open, and she looked at Elena with an expression that had no performance in it, just a tired, clear, direct attention. Elena sat in the chair beside the bed. She set a glass of water on the side table. "The cooperation agreement," Vivian said. "Hartley has it in progress," Elena said. "She's giving them everything, the Caruso network, the intermediaries, the financial structure they've been building for 8 years. She paused. "The federal case is going to be significant." Vivian absorbed this. "And the 42 million? Frozen. Recovery proceedings will take time, but Hartley is confident. And Damien? Upstairs, talking to the captains." Elena looked at her hands in her lap. "He's doing it right. He's not deflecting." Vivian was quiet for a moment. "He was always capable of doing the right thing," she said. "He needed to want to badly enough." She looked at Elena. "You gave him a reason to want to." "The money gave him a reason," Elena said. "The money clarified the situation," Vivian said. "You gave him the reason." A beat. "There's a difference. You stayed in this when you had no obligation to. You came back into a family that had thrown you out, and you worked to save it, and you did it without asking for anything in return." She paused. "That's not strategy, that's character." Elena looked at the window. The October dark outside was complete, no moon visible, just the ambient light of the surrounding area softening the edges of the tree line. She thought about what character meant, coming from this woman, in this room, after this night. She thought about Ruth Hart in a small Connecticut house, raising a child she hadn't born and asking no questions about the child's past, because the child's future was what mattered. She thought about the note that had come with the necklace. "This came with you. I always meant to ask where it was from." "My mother, Ruth, she never tried to find out where I came from," Elena said. "She had the necklace and she must have known it meant something, but she never pushed." Vivian looked at her carefully. "I'm not saying she was wrong," Elena said. "She gave me everything she had. I just wonder sometimes what she knew and decided not to tell me." A pause. "Or what she didn't know and was afraid to find out." "She may have been protecting you," Vivian said quietly. "From what?" "From exactly what happened these past few weeks," Vivian said. "From the weight of where you came from this family and what comes with it." She paused. She may have looked at that necklace and understood that the life attached to it was not one she could protect you from, and decided that not knowing was safer than knowing half. Elena sat with that for a moment. It was the most generous interpretation of Ruth's silence, and it was probably right, and accepting it as right required accepting that Ruth had seen something clearly that Elena, at 33, was only beginning to understand that the Moretti name carried a specific gravity, a pull toward exactly the kind of nights that had just ended, and that the woman who had raised Elena in a quiet Connecticut suburb had perhaps, in her quiet and limited and entirely loving way, tried to spare her from it. "She couldn't keep it from you forever," Vivian said. "You found your way here anyway." "I married into it," Elena said, "without knowing." "Yes." Vivian's voice was very careful. "Do you think that was coincidence?" Elena looked at her. "I have thought about that question for weeks," Vivian said, "since Croft first brought me the connection. Elena Hart, married to Damien Moretti, my lost daughter, inside my family for 7 years, and none of us knew." She paused. "I don't have an answer. I don't know if it was chance or something in you that recognized this world without knowing why. But I know that you were here, and I know that when you were thrown out, you stayed anyway. And I know—" Her voice caught briefly, one small fracture in the controlled surface. "I know that if I had gotten to keep you, I would have wanted you to become exactly the person you are." The room was very quiet. Elena did not cry. She had cried twice in her adult life in front of another person, and both times she had regretted the vulnerability of it, not because vulnerability was weakness, but because she had not yet been in rooms where it was safe. This room, she thought, might be different. This woman might be different. But the habit of containment was 26 years old, and it did not dissolve in a single night. And so what she did instead was reach out and put her hand over Vivian's on the coverlet, and she held it, and she let the silence say what her voice wasn't ready to. After a while, Vivian's breathing slowed and deepened. Elena sat beside her until she was certain she was asleep, then turned off the bedside lamp and went out. The cooperation agreement was signed 6 weeks later. In those 6 weeks, a great deal happened in a compressed and exhausting sequence. Vanessa, who in the formal legal proceedings reverted to her given name of Mafia Boss, provided a full accounting of the Caruso operation's New York activities going back to 2018. The U.S. Attorney's Office, which had been building an adjacent case on port access corruption for 2 years, received her testimony as Hartley had predicted, with significant interest. The Caruso family's leadership was indicted on 14 counts before the first snow of the season fell on the city. 3 of the new captains Vanessa had installed inside Damien's organization were quietly removed. The Callaway Holding Company was dissolved by court order. The $42 million began its slow legal journey back. Marco Reyes took a plea. The 2 men from the Riverdale basement took pleas. Vanessa, Mara, received a reduced sentence in exchange for her testimony, which was the outcome Elena had laid out to her in the Westchester study, and which Mara had apparently calculated with the same precise rationality she had applied to everything else. She would serve time. Not as much as she deserved, in Felix's estimation, which he stated once, directly, and then did not mention again because he was not a man who spent energy on what couldn't be changed. Damien stood before his remaining captains 2 weeks after the Riverdale night and gave an accounting of his failures that lasted 40 minutes. Elena was not in the room. It was not her meeting to be in. But Felix told her afterward that Damien had not hedged a single thing, had named every decision he'd made under Vanessa's influence that had cost the organization, every loyalty he had disregarded, every warning he had dismissed, had told them that the restructuring would be rebuilt from the ground up with the input of the people who had been doing this work for 20 and 30 years. "And?" Elena had asked. "Carmine cried," Felix said, with the expression of a man who found this both embarrassing and appropriate. "Which I will deny if you repeat it. The estate documents were returned to the family safe. The painting went back on the wall. The safe combination was changed." It was a Thursday evening in December when Elena finally went back to the Westchester estate for dinner at Vivian's invitation, an invitation that had been carefully worded to include no pressure, no expectation, just a time and a place and a meal being cooked. She drove herself, parked on the drive, sat in the car for 2 minutes, looking at the lit windows of the house, at the oak trees along the drive that had lost their leaves and stood bare and clean against the winter sky, at the light in the upstairs window that she knew was Vivian's sitting room. She got out. Lucia opened the door, which was unexpected and entirely characteristic of Lucia. She hugged Elena before either of them said a word, and Elena let her, and it was awkward and genuine in equal measure. You look better than you did 2 months ago, Lucia said. 2 months ago I was in a car with your brother and a man named Tomas trying to get to Riverdale before your mother was moved. I said better, not good. Lucia stepped back and looked at her. The job? Good. Useful. Elena followed her inside. It turns out I'm competent at things that have nothing to do with being anyone's wife. Groundbreaking discovery, Lucia said, with the dry warmth that had always made Elena like her. The house smelled of food being made, something with garlic and wine, and the low background warmth of a kitchen that had been working for hours. Elena followed the sound and smell to the back of the house, where Vivian stood at the counter with her sleeves rolled and a wooden spoon in her hand, and the posture of a woman entirely in her own domain. The sutures above her cheekbone had healed to a thin scar that would fade. The bruising around her eye was gone. She looked up when Elena came in and said, "You're 4 minutes early. The sauce isn't ready." "I can wait," Elena said. "You can sit," Vivian said, gesturing with the spoon at the kitchen table. "There's wine. Pour yourself a glass. Pour me one." Elena poured. She sat at the table and watched Vivian move around the kitchen with the particular efficiency of someone who cooks the way she did everything else. Without wasted motion, with complete knowledge of where everything was and what order things needed to happen in. She thought about all the dinners that had happened in this house while she had been on the other side of the wall, the wife in the formal dining room while the kitchen was someone else's territory. She thought about how different a room looked when you were allowed to simply sit in it. Damien came in from the hallway at the 20-minute mark, jacket off, in the way he moved around his family's house that she had observed across 7 years without ever quite recognizing as the specific ease of a person in the one place where they didn't have to perform anything. He looked at Elena at the table and he stopped in the doorway for a moment with the look she had come to recognize as his recalibration expression. The brief adjustment of a man who still hadn't entirely metabolized the fact of her, what she was, what she represented, and what he owed her. He crossed to the counter and poured himself a glass of wine. He sat down at the other end of the table. "The consulting firm," he said. "You're staying?" "For now," Elena said. "Good work?" "Honest work." She looked at him. "That's what I needed." He nodded. He turned his wine glass on the table, once. "The federal proceedings are going to require your testimony." Hartley said probably March. "I know. Sandra is coordinating with Hartley on the specifics. If there's anything you need from the organization side to support your account." "I have everything I need," Elena said. "Croft's documentation is airtight." A pause. Vivian moved between them to retrieve something from the cabinet above the counter, and the small domestic interruption absorbed the silence in a way that made it less heavy. "How is Felix?" Elena asked. Damien's expression shifted into something more natural. Insufferable. He was right about everything, and he is fully aware of that fact and intends to remain aware of it indefinitely. "Good," Elena said. "He asked about you." "Tell him I'll call him." Damien looked at her. "You know he'd like that." "I know," she said. Another pause. Vivian set a bread basket on the table between them without ceremony, a completely ordinary gesture in a completely ordinary kitchen moment. And Elena looked at the bread, at the table, at the two people on either side of her, and felt something she didn't immediately have a word for. Not happiness exactly, which seemed too clean and too complete for what the past 2 months had been. Something more like the sensation of a thing that has been off balance for a very long time, finally finding its level. Uncomfortable and unfamiliar, and underneath both of those things, right. "I want to say something," Damien said. Vivian looked at him from the counter. Elena looked at him from across the table. "I'm not going to ask you to come back," he said. He was speaking to Elena, slowly, with the care of a man who has rehearsed this, and is nonetheless finding it more difficult than the rehearsal. "To this family, to whatever the old arrangement was. I know that's not what either of us is sitting here for." A pause. "But I need to say, that what you did, across all of this, with everything I had given you reason to walk away from, I understand what it cost, and I don't have a—" He stopped, started differently. "There isn't a version of what I'm supposed to say here that fits what actually happened, so I'm just going to say that I know, and that I intend to spend whatever time I have proving that it wasn't wasted on me." The kitchen was quiet. Elena looked at him for a long moment, at the lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 7 years ago, at the particular quality of his stillness, which had always been the part of him she had most accurately read and most consistently underestimated. "I didn't do it for you," she said. "It was not unkind. It was precise. I did it because Vivian is my mother, and this family was taken from me before I knew it existed, and when I finally found it, I wasn't willing to let someone dismantle it." She paused. "But I'm glad you know, and I'll be watching to see if you mean it." He nodded, took a sip of wine. "That's fair?" "It's more than fair," Vivian said from the counter without turning around. "It's generous. Don't push it." Damien looked at the table. Elena saw something move in his expression, something that in a less controlled man would have been a smile. It emerged briefly and then resolved back into his usual surface. But it was real, and she filed it away in the same place she filed all the things she was slowly learning to recognize about him. The brother she was learning in reverse, from adulthood backward, without the childhood she should have had to build the knowledge on. It was not what she had lost. It was what she had. She was beginning to understand those were not the same thing. After dinner, Elena helped Vivian wash the dishes. This was not something that had been arranged or suggested. Lucia had offered and been waved off. Damien had offered and been ignored. And so it ended up being Elena beside Vivian at the sink in the quiet aftermath of a meal, with the water running and the sound of Damien and Lucia's voices from the other room carrying through the wall, low and ordinary. Vivian washed, Elena dried. The system established itself without discussion. "The necklace," Vivian said. She was looking at the sink. Elena touched the pendant at her throat. She had put it on that morning the way she put it on every morning, without deliberation, from habit, from the 33-year-old instinct that it belonged there. "I want you to know something about it," Vivian said. "The craftsman who made it, he made two. One for me. One for my daughter, because that's what the tradition was in my husband's family. Mother and child with matching pieces, so the child could always find her way back." She paused. "I still have mine. I have worn it every day for 26 years. Elena set down the dish she was drying. Vivian reached into the collar of her blouse and drew out a chain. The pendant that hung from it was the same. Amber, same ornate bezel, same filigreed leaves, the small differences of handcraft making them distinct, but unmistakably from the same origin, the same intention, the same pair. Elena looked at them. The two pendants side by side over the sink, one that had traveled with her through a Connecticut suburb and a marriage and a divorce and a discovery and 2 months of the most consequential weeks of her life. One that had stayed in place for 26 years, carried by a woman who had refused, in the deepest and most private part of herself, to stop. She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that would not be smaller than the moment. Vivian tucked her pendant back inside her collar and turned back to the sink. "There is a room upstairs," she said, with the same tone she might use to mention that the sauce had been ready for 4 minutes. "It's been a guest room for 15 years. I would like to change it." She paused. "You don't have to use it. The apartment on 68th is yours and your life is yours, and I'm not asking you to move back into this house or into any version of the life you had before." A beat. "But I want there to be a room here that is yours. That's all." The water ran between them. "What color is it now?" Elena asked. "Green," Vivian said. "A terrible green. Marco picked it in 1987, and I have disliked it every day since." Elena dried the last dish, set it on the rack. "I've always liked blue," she said. Vivian nodded once, as though this confirmed something she had suspected. "Blue it is." She left the estate at 10 o'clock, which was later than she'd planned and earlier than part of her had wanted. She drove back toward the city through the November dark with the heat running and the radio off and the specific quiet of a car on a highway at night, which she had always found clarifying. The motion without destination, the temporary suspension of everything that required decision. She thought about what Hartley had told her the week before, during a routine call about the federal testimony schedule, that the Caruso case was likely to be the largest organized crime prosecution in the district in a decade, that the names Mara Voss had given them were changing the shape of several ongoing investigations, that the operation she had been running inside the Moretti organization had been more sophisticated and more deeply resourced than even Croft's initial documentation had suggested. She thought about Mara in a courtroom, giving testimony in the flat, precise voice Elena had heard on the phone, The voice of a person reporting information, not experiencing it. She thought about the 26 years of a family's grief and the deliberateness with which the Caruso organization had perpetuated it, first by taking a child and then by sending a woman to dismantle what survived. She thought about what it meant to operate at that level of patience, to wait a generation and then deploy a person against the next one. She thought about Vivian at the sink with her pendant. She thought about Ruth Hart's note. This came with you. The highway opened up past the city limits, and she let the car move, and she didn't think about any of it for a while. Just drove, just breathed, just let the distance accumulate behind her in the dark. She was not the woman she had been on the morning Damien handed her the divorce papers. That woman had been defined almost entirely by what she was to other people: wife, daughter-in-law, a presence at dinners, and a signature on the household accounts, and the person who made certain things run smoothly without being acknowledged for the running. She had not been without value. She had been without attribution. She had spent 7 years becoming invisible inside a life that was mostly someone else's. What she was now was harder to name. Not whole. Nothing that had happened in the past 2 months was the kind of thing that made a person whole. The grief for the childhood she had not had, for the mother who had searched for her and the family she had grown up without, for the marriage that had failed before she understood what had been working against it. None of that was resolved. It was simply integrated, carried differently. The way you carry something that isn't going away, that you've stopped fighting and started moving alongside instead. She was the daughter of Vivian Moretti, the half-sister of a man she was learning in pieces, the woman who had signed divorce papers without begging and walked out without breaking and come back when it mattered without being asked. She was employed, housed, legally herself. She was the person Croft called when he had information because she had demonstrated she could be trusted with it. She was the person Felix had looked at across a conference table and said, with the economy of someone who does not waste words, "You've been in this world longer than you thought." She was 33 years old, and she had just found out where she came from. She merged onto the bridge and the city opened before her. Lights across the water, the geometry of it, familiar and indifferent. A city that had accommodated her loss and her reclamation with equal disregard, as cities do. She had always found that comforting. The city did not need her to be any particular thing. She crossed the bridge. She took the exit toward West 68th. She parked in the building garage and rode the elevator to her floor and let herself into the apartment, which was small and quiet and entirely hers, and she stood in the dark of it for a moment before reaching for the light. On the kitchen counter was the notepad she had sat with on the morning the divorce was finalized, the one she had held the pen over without writing anything. She had kept it there without knowing why. Some instinct that the blankness of it meant something she wasn't ready to name. She picked up the pen now. She didn't write anything elaborate. She wrote a date, today's date, and 2 words beneath it, "Still here." She put the pen down. She turned on the light. She went to make coffee because it was late and she had work in the morning and her life was continuing in the ordinary and necessary way that lives continue, even after the extraordinary things that interrupt them, even after everything that cannot be undone or explained or fully absorbed has settled into the body and become part of the weight you carry forward. The necklace rested against her collarbone, where it had always rested, where it would rest tomorrow. Somewhere across the city, in a room that was about to be painted blue, a woman who had searched for 26 years had found what she was looking for. And in this apartment, with coffee brewing and the city going about its business beyond the window, so had she.